Welcome back. This is lesson number 2. This is a series where I am going to teach you the meaning of JavaScript code used in gaming. And at the end, we will be coding our first arcade game known as Pong. Okay, so I could just show you my code and you could just copy it in Notepad. But what's the fun of that? What's the fun when you don't know what something means? So we are going to start learning. Okay, the first lesson. Everything in programming begins as information. Information lives in variables. Do you remember from my first video, I said it would help if you had a basic understanding of algebra. In algebra, we have variables. Along graphs, we have the x and y axis. The x is horizontal and the y is vertical. We could call them C. We could have called them D. X and Y are just letters we give variables. Okay. Let's think of this. Variables are labeled boxes that store information. When it comes to a game, and we think of movement, the computers actually, the ball is not actually moving. For example, in Pong, movement is just information, and it's just the computer changing position from one XY on a graph to a new XY position on the graph. Remember I told you, think of our canvas. The canvas is where you put your game as graph paper. But the graph of the X and Y on the computer is actually upside down. Don't ask me why, that's just the way it is. Okay, going back to movement. Movement is simply changing numbers. So when we code, we will code something like a ball. Ball X plus or equal ball speed X. Okay, now I can hear you saying, how can that be? But ball X, we're talking about the X-axis. Ball X doesn't have a value except a position, okay? All right, it does have a value later, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about on the position at the moment. So the screen is a graph. So in computer graphics, positive Y goes down. If you remember, in my first lesson, I said when you go up, Y decreases, gets smaller. So, like I told you again, and I'll repeat, the computer screen is graph paper turned upside down. Changing information doesn't change the screen. Drawing does. Okay, when we draw a circle or we're coding, the computer thinks, what is the value of X? What is the value of Y? What is the radius? And what is the color? Another thing, computer doesn't understand English. Programmers invented English, like words, to make programming easier for humans. So, if we're coding and we said ball, the computer doesn't understand the word ball. It is just, what I'm trying to say, it doesn't picture a ball. It doesn't know what a ball is. That's just information to it. All right, let's quickly do in this lesson a lesson 2. Earlier in my first video, I said that there are 8 lessons, but within each lesson, there are mini lessons. So we'll go on. The computer remembers. Let's think of every variable as being in a drawer. So when you code and you say ball X, the computer looks in the ball drawer for X. More on that in a later lesson. Variables are names. You will see something like this. VAR, ball equals 400. Ball X is the label of the drawer. The drawer. In the drawer, we have drawer label, ball X. Inside the drawer, 400. Remember, I just told you before, ball X equals 400. So we look at the drawer. The drawer label is ball X. Inside the drawer is 400. Now the next bit is important. Variables are temporary. When you switch your game off, everything disappears. So it's not stored there permanently. You turn the computer off, it's gone. So a variable is a named place in computer memory that stores one piece of information. The variable name is the label. The value is the information inside the label. Programming, you break big ideas into small pieces of information. Okay, let's continue with another lesson. How the CPU, the computer, makes decisions. How does the computer decide? It doesn't think. It tests. So you give it a line of code, it doesn't think, oh, this is great code, or this code would work. It tests your code. Let's continue with Boolean logic. Okay, Boolean was some guy who invented logic, and it basically is true or false. These are called Boolean values. true or false will come in handy later in coding. For example, you might have if something equals true, which is usually an event, then something happens. If something equals false, something else happens, but that's at a different time. Okay, now remember I told you I did philosophy? In philosophy, we have if A, then B. Okay, we're going to discuss curly brackets. Now, when I was learning coding and curly brackets, where do I find the curly brackets? If you look next to the letter P on your keyboard to the right, you find curly brackets. Later lessons, I will discuss the curly brackets and what they mean, but for now, let's continue. So, in JavaScript, remember I said in philosophy, we have if A, then B. In JavaScript, we have if and then something in brackets, normal brackets, then curly bracket opening this way. If A occur in bracket, so if in brackets A, a curly bracket B, end curly bracket. It's simply saying if A, then B happens, okay? For example, you might have in Pong, if in brackets ball X is less than 0, close the brackets, a curly bracket, player 2, score, plus, curly bracket. I'll explain more about this later on. I'm just giving you examples. Okay, so what I just said, what that means, if ball X position is less than 0, then increase player 2's score. If A, then B. Remember in my first video, I said equals means exact. So in JavaScript, if you have score equals 10, that means the score exactly 10. All right, going back to philosophy, A and B. So philosophy, where you have A and B, the JavaScript equivalent are the two and signs above the key 7. So when I said if A and B, you replace that and in JavaScript with the two symbol ands above the number 7. That just means and. So you might code if in brackets ball X is greater than 100 and the symbols and ball Y is greater than 200, which means it must satisfy both conditions. It must satisfy that ball X is greater than 100 and ball Y is greater than 200. X and Y, again being the position on the graph. All right, so suppose ball X is 150. That means 150 is greater than 100. That's true. Ball Y greater than 250. Ball Y being 250. Check. 250 is greater than 200. That's true. So it's true and true. The computer runs the code. Then you have JavaScript, where 1 is enough. So, for example, say you are coding a game and either the score was 10 or lives, you lost all their lives. So you would have if, and then in brackets, score equals 10, and then you use the symbol, the straight line. I'm just trying to find it for you. Where is the straight line? It is above Enter key on your right side, next to the curly brackets, the straight. So you have in brackets score. So let me repeat that. If in brackets score equals 10, straight line, lives equal 0, bracket, which means either score 10 or 0 lives. The code runs. So back to philosophy. If A or B, only one has to be true. Okay. Now we're looking at JavaScript, and I'm going to show you about true and false. So if, for example, say you wrote in your code VAR, game over, equals false. Now, and that little hyphen dot, so the hyphen game over means not game over. So I'll have to show you. See if you can read my book here at the top. That might make more sense. All right, I'm going to show you. In philosophy, where you have two conditions have to be true for it to be true. So, for example, condition A and condition B both have to be true. To be true, the game runs. Where you have only one has to be true. So, for example, A is true, B is false. No, I've just messed that up. Okay. We're looking here at and, okay? The and, where both A and B must be true to run the code. So if A is true and B is true, the code is true and it runs. If A is true and B is false, A and B is false. It doesn't work. If you have A as false and B as true, the answer is false. If you have A false, B false, JavaScript's false. I'll show you the bottom because I might not have made sense. Can you see? Remember, I told you, can you see the two symbols there for and? So both A and B must be true for a certain outcome. I'm going to explain as we get into it the different meanings, but I'm just in this part of the lesson showing you what different codes mean, okay? Do you remember just before I said only one condition has to be true? Either A or B for something to happen? So, if A is true and B is true, then JavaScript is true. So we're having A // you'll see it up the top there. So this is where either A or B to satisfy a condition. So if A is false but B is true, then it's still true for JavaScript. If A is true and B is false, it is still true for JavaScript for that code because we're looking at either A or B to satisfy a condition. But if A is false and B is false, it is then false. As I said, in future lessons, we will talk about what other parts mean, but I will give you a bit, before I end this, I'll give you something else. Say the condition about a ball hitting the paddle. So you would code it in JavaScript if, because it's a condition, if, and then in brackets, you would have ball X is less than paddle width and ball Y is greater than paddle top and ball Y is less than paddle bottom in brackets, and then a curly bracket opening, and then two things, bounce the ball, then curly bracket. So what that meant is if, in brackets, do the following. And both must be true. Those two straight lines, or only one true. The hyphen, it's not a, what's it called? That, that line and a little dot underneath, you know what I'm talking about. If it's not, that means not, reverse the answer. I will show you in my book because I'm not making sense. There you go. So here at the moment, I'm just explaining the different code. We'll get into more depth as we go into more lessons. Okay. I'm going to stop there. No, I'll just continue a little bit more. Sometimes in JavaScript, you'll see 2 plus signs. What does 2 plus signs mean? It actually means add 1. it means increase this variable by exactly one more. So you will see when you code score plus plus, which actually means score equals score plus 1. Okay, let's do some maths. X equals 5, Javascript x equals 5. Put the value 5 into box called x. Ball x equals ball x plus 10. Now people get really iffy and say, how can ball x equal ball x plus 10? No, ball x is the position of the ball on the x-axis. So ball x, where it's moved, is ball x plus 10, meaning it's moved 10 positions along the x-axis. Okay, before I end, because I'm going to over time, when we have ball x equals ball x plus 10, the computer looks inside ball x. Suppose it contains 50. It calculates 50 plus 10 equals 60. So x, if you have x equals x plus 5, it just means increase by 5. Because I can hear you, some of you saying, how can x equal x plus 5? All it means is increase by 5. So I'll just end it here. So instead of writing score equals score plus 1, you write score plus plus. Instead of writing ball x equals ball x plus 10, you write ball x plus equals 10. Instead of lives, if you had a game where lives equals lives minus 1, you write lives and 2 subtraction after it. So lines, a subtraction mark, and a subtraction mark. Again, I will show you at the top there. Okay, remember var is a variable. So let's have a look at this. Var, you'll see written var ball x equals 400 with a semicolon. Bar ball speed equals 5 semicolon. That means every frame ball x plus equals ball speed x. 400 plus 5 is 405. The next frame, 405 plus 5 equals 410. All right. Let's just continue because I'm on a roll here, and then I'll end it. Say you had VAR ball x equals 100, VAR speed equals 10. So ball x starts at 100, speed is 10. So the first instruction, ball x plus or equals speed, semicolon, ball x equals ball x plus speed, ball x equals 110. The second, ball x plus or equals speed, ball x is then 110 plus 10, 120. So this is frame after frame. So you have a start value, it changes to a new. So every time it changes, the computer stores the new value. I'm just at this stage teaching you when you see in writing what code means. Also, you'll see return. Return means send this value to whatever the function was called. You might have a function multiply, brackets AB, you return A, little starry thing B. Next lesson, we'll look at scope. All right. As I said, I'm just doing the code, okay? What the codes mean. So this is really not so much for beginners, because I'll just quickly show you my page so you'll understand. You'll see it'll be coded like this, and I'm just explaining what that code means. All right, until next lesson, and eventually we will get to all the different meanings. I'm just going through my book. And I'll also tell you, as we get through the lessons, the order of games, the order of Pong itself. All right. I've probably done your head in, because you're probably thinking, I don't know what any of that means. But if you think of VAR as a variable, now that is pretty old school. I will later introduce you to LET, which means it can change, and CONST, which stands for consonant. It's pretty easy. Look, after you go through these lessons and then you see my code, you'll understand what I'm talking about. Maybe go back over the lessons when you see my code, and it'll make sense. Thank you very much for watching. Please, going to do a comment, do so respectfully. All right. Love, light, and blessings. Be sure to check out my books. My name, Gemstone. Bye.